the West has just dropped a new buttload of sanctions onto Russia. The West and the United States have been piling sanctions on top of Russia since the invasion of Ukraine, but unfortunately, a lot of them haven't proven to be very successful. The Russians have been able to get around a lot of them, especially in regards to like shipping oil, the pricing of oil. They've been able to get around that. And so the West is now, okay, how are we going to target anybody that is doing business in or around Russia's military industry? Well, the U.S. Treasury Department has explicitly targeted Russia's main financial marketplace, the Moscow Exchange. And they're saying they're targeting it because they are helping Russians profit from the Kremlin's war machine. That's the quote.
Yeah.
And the main avenue for these sanctions, the main the justification is that Russia is now in a state of total war.
Yeah.
And every aspect of their economy is going towards fighting the war.
Okay.
And so any bank that does anything that has to do with investments into Russia, that is enough to justify the fact that they are aiding and abetting the Russian war machine.
Okay, I think it's interesting to do this. The timing is what's interesting to me because Russia's been in total war for a while. I guess the economic data recently is showing that their economy is more based on the war than maybe we could have known before. But it strikes me as odd and more of a reaction to the previous Western sanctions not working as well as we wanted them to.
Yeah.
Rather than a reaction to anything Russia's doing.
This is something that we didn't really want to do. We didn't want to go after the financial institutions inside of Russia because we wanted to keep some type of global financial confidence.
Yeah.
Right? That there were still an open system.
Yeah.
And not totally disregard that whole economic model, which they're now doing.
We also want layered sanctions. We want tiered sanctions so that if Russia escalates, we can escalate.
Right.
We don't want to just have to escalate randomly.
Right. So the main juice of these new sanctions is that foreign banks are at risk for secondary. So these foreign banks, if they are caught doing business with anything involving the Russian military or the Russian industrial base, they're going to get in trouble too. And now these banks are not going to want to take the risk of operating with these Russian banks.
Yeah. Is this the case for any bank also that does business with the Moscow Exchange?
Yeah, so anything they do to facilitate transactions involving Russia's military-industrial base, and then anything that is involving the military-industrial base is anything that goes through the Bank Public Joint Stock Company and the Public Joint Stock Company Bank of Russia.
Okay.
So
this is basically just a total decoupling of Russia. This feels like accelerating towards the deglobalized world or like the regionally globalized world that we've been talking about for over a year now about like what we're going towards. So it means that countries now are going to have to make the decision. You either deal with Russia or you deal with the U.S.
That's it. That's going to be the decision. Any financial institution caught doing business with the two banks I just mentioned or any other large Russian financial institutions can be hit with sanctions. So you're completely cutting these banks off from outside capital entirely.
Yeah.
In addition to this, no business or person is allowed to provide IT or cloud computational assistance to any businesses in Russia at all. So all of those IT services, and a lot of the IT services are coming from the West.
Yeah.
That's very, the service-centric economies of the United States, right? That's our major export.
Sure.
And so now none of that is getting into Russia anymore, which means that a lot of the Russian infrastructure is now going to age and age poorly because they're not going to be able to upkeep it with the most, with the best labor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, this is broadened so much. Like when I say that something going towards the military-industrial sector, quote unquote, that's just to make the sanctions legal. But what that really means is every single financial institution, every bank, because they've broadened the terms of aiding and abetting military infrastructure to incorporate everything in the entire economy, right? So one of the largest risks for Russia is now the euro and dollar currency exchanges going on inside of the country. That's one of the biggest problems. So Moscow's interbank market, Moscow is now exchanging, people inside of Moscow are now exchanging their dollar or their rubles for dollars and euros in the interbank market instead of on the centralized exchange, which is now allowing the banks to charge higher commission fees for each one of those currency transactions. And so that means that the spread of cash that is actually getting transferred is less. So for every 1 ruble, you should be getting 10 cents. Now it's like for every 1 ruble, you're getting 8 cents.
So the
Because
ruble
the
is being devalued.
The
by
ruble
this.
is getting devalued a lot by this because the bank is now taking more off the top because the centralized exchange is totally cut off.
Okay. I don't know if I'm hoping you know this. I might just be asking a question that catches you completely off guard.
Find out.
What is the interbank market as
Oh,
in
interbank
contrast to the centralized exchange?
Well, centralized exchange means banks can go to the Moscow Central Bank
Okay.
and do the exchange. Interbank is they're buying currency from banks individually.
I see.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So instead of Bank A going to the central bank and then paying Bank B,
Mhm.
it's Bank A buying dollars from Bank B.
Okay. So this is just going to drive the price of the ruble down, which is going to make imports more expensive.
Way more expensive. Imports will be way more expensive. That's right.
Okay.
Exactly. So it will significantly raise the cost of doing business,
Mm.
and it will drastically increase prices. Anything that involves an input from the outside, anything that involves an input from outside of Russia, will see their prices go up. And this is happening in an economy where the inflation rate of Russia is already 8.
Yeah.
Right. So
Okay.
it's only going to increase that. In recent months, Moscow has been moving away from the ruble and the dollar for foreign exchanges and going more towards the Chinese yuan or the yen, whatever. And now the yen to ruble exchange rate is like the benchmark currency. And 54% of Russia's international trade is done through the yen now.
Wow.
But that doesn't mean that the dollar and the euro aren't still important to Russia's economy. There's still a large chunk, 46% of that is still being done in dollars and euros. That's still a ton of money,
Yeah.
a big part of their economy. But Russia is very much molding itself and pushing itself into China's sphere.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
My question with these secondary sanctions on the financial institutions is how are these Chinese businesses and Chinese banks going to respond?
I don't know.
Because we've already reported before that Chinese banks have been pulling back from doing business with Russia due to fear of U.S. retaliation. And so Russian business has kind of started to funnel into these really small banks right along the border.
Mm-hmm.
If they're cracking down even more, it's just going to get harder and harder for China to do business with Russia. And I can't imagine it staying worth it.
Right. Like
for
it
them.
disincentivizes China from doing business with Russia. And there's already a ton of reasons why China doesn't really want Russia in China doesn't want Russia as their partner. They're like, it's
Exactly.
the one they're stuck with.
Yes.
You know, it's the one
Yes.
they're stuck with. And they're like dragging over this dead guy over the finish line.
They are.
That's what's happening. And
Yeah.
I can just imagine that she at some point is going to be looking at Russia and being like, I don't want you as my partner. And eventually she is going to move away from looking Putin as a partner and more as a vassal.
Yes.
And that's what's going to happen. And one good example of this is that's already happening. We're going to talk about this in episode next week or this week is Russia cutting off or China not accepting gas from Russia
Mhm.
in the deal that Russia wants.
Yeah.
China wants to buy Russian gas at 25% what it would normally cost in the international market.
Yeah.
And China knows that it can ask that because Russia's got nowhere else to go.
Russia has, they have nothing. They have no leverage to use with anyone of importance right now.
And so now Russia is facing more and more financial troubles because on top of all these sanctions, they're also running out of money.
Yeah.
Oil prices are not rising because America is awesome, and that's a whole other topic. But we've totally destroyed OPEC. But Putin is having to raise taxes on corporations. Taxes have gone from 20 to 25%.
Oh.
They just did another income tax hike. So now
Oh.
Russia is forced to raise taxes, which will then slow economic activity.
Yeah.
Right, and
It's going to lower consumption, which they already don't have much of because they're already a poor country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so now Medvedev, this is like the ex-president of Russia. He's like, how would you describe him?
Medvedev is he's like the Tucker Carlson of
Yeah.
Russia. That's how I've heard him described. He's like the one who puts the craziest ideas out there, and he has kind of a shred of importance or of clout because
Yeah.
he used to be the president of Russia, but he's totally a vassal to Putin. He's just
Yeah.
there to throw things out and see how the public reacts.
Yeah, that's the good way to describe it. I hear it's like Putin's like testing the waters to see how certain phrases will go.
Yeah.
Right. So, but Medvedev comes out and he calls on Russian businesses to do everything they can to attack Western economies. He says, quote, literally destroy their energy, industry, transport, banking, and social services. I'd like to see you try, buddy.
Yeah,
What are you talking about?
Do?
What are you going to do? You're a third world country at this point, bro.
Yeah, where do you see this going? I truly think Chinese and Russian trade, like, it will make up the vast majority of Russia's trade,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still going to decline overall because
Yeah.
China's going to want to do less and less of it, right?
Yeah.
So, like, Russia is just going to decline economically, and the only way that they're going to be able to try to recover at any point is to end the invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, or they win it, right? Or
Sure.
they conquer all of Ukraine,
Yeah.
and then they keep the war economy rolling, and then they go into another country,
I see.
and, right?
Yeah,
Like,
Moldova.
if they do a perpetual war,
Yeah.
that could do something.
I suppose,
If
but
they build their economy around it, but that's just not. It's not sustainable, obviously. Because,
Yeah.
and also, one of the major aspects of these sanctions that are hurting Russia so poorly is the lack of access to Western tech and Western information.
yes,
Because once these systems get broken, there's no way for them to fix them.
yes,
These Western systems were built by German engineers, by
exactly.
German technicians.
Yeah,
And now the German technicians aren't going into Russia anymore.
no,
And so now when something breaks, no one's there to fix it.
yeah, and they're not gonna like innovate their way out of it as
No.
far as all of this infrastructure stuff. So they would need China to come and do it. China does not want to do it charitably. They don't
Yeah.
want to do it for free. Russia can't pay for all of it. Not to mention, and we don't even touch like the whole demographic issue, which
Yeah.
means that they don't have the labor to try to keep running their own country
No.
without foreign help.
No, they don't have and Russia doesn't even have a consumption base.
Exactly.
The only thing that they're banking on is being able to sell their gas abroad. But as we're going to talk about on our episode tomorrow, even that is in trouble.